Hello everybody, this is Connor at BoatsDon'tSink, here with another Shadowverse Evolve deck profile. This is a deck that I've been working on with some of my locals for the last couple weeks and been playing, and it has been super fun. It's definitely not one of the conventional rune builds that you might see, but today we're going to be looking at Eggsplosion Rune. So of course with Eggsplosion that means Humpty Dumpty. Now, normally you're going to see Humpty Dumpty in the Fable lists, since he is one of the more notable Fable followers from BP03. Generally going to see him in Havencraft, which is able to make up for the fact that the Evolve discards your hand by utilizing a bunch of sort of recursive amulets and EX area card advantage. Occasionally in Forest, but not as much. It is mainly Haven where you're going to see him. However, instead of focusing on Humpty Dumpty, the follower in this deck, we're going to be looking at the other part of his package, the Eggsplosion Spell. So this is a 3-cost spell that does a bajillion damage to everything, except for yourself. And you know what class takes really good advantage of spells, especially that cost exactly 3? That's going to be Runecraft. So before we look at the deck list, reminder, this is fairly experimental, and we're still in the process of optimizing it. What we have right now that I'm going to show you is pretty much just a good starting point. Play with it yourself, figure out what cards you like, don't like, maybe tune some stuff to your meta, and keep playing it from there. So let's jump in. For the most part, this is going to look like a standard spell chain deck, or maybe even pieces of what you might see in a Dimension Shift deck. However, you're quickly going to realize there are basically no spell chain payoffs, outside of a couple spells that get additional effects and the Mithril Golem at the top end. Instead, this is all kind of just turbo draw power and removal and eggs. So it's super fun looking deck, super weird looking if you're not used to this kind of thing. Definitely different from the normal rune builds. Our Evolve deck is pretty straightforward. This actually is going to look mostly like a normal rune deck, where you're just maxing out on like the couple of Evolve followers you even play. We do have one Humpty Dumpty in here, as well as one Carrot. It does get strangely tight for a rune list, because normally Rune is only playing the 3rd Merlin or 3rd Agnes Tachyon because they don't have anything else to play. Here we actually need 3 copies of each Evolve. So we do have to sort of thin down, only being able to play 2 Craig, 1 Carrot, and the 1 Humpty Dumpty. We have a very low cost curve here. We're playing 14 2-drops, 14 3-drops, only 5 cards higher than 3. We have 7 1-drops, so fairly likely to build a mulligan into a turn 1 play, or if not, just a decent bit of cheap removal or cheap action. It basically means we can always use all of our play points. Since everything is so cheap, the math is able to add up to exactly what you need every turn pretty easily. We have lots of filter. 18 followers, 22 spells. It is a little follower heavy for like a spell chain style deck. That's just because we have the 3 Humpty Dumpties. Generally that would probably be like 15 and 25 otherwise. But the numbers look pretty normal for a spell deck. You can adjust this a little bit. I'll look at some cards at the end that you could try slotting in, and maybe actually even shifting this heavier into a follower-based deck instead of a spell-based deck. First card we're playing is 3 copies of Insight. This is kind of just the quintessential draw spell for Rune. It's just a quick timing draw card. If you open this on your first turn, you can just pass with your play point up. Your opponent now has to worry about whether you have removal or not, since we do have a 1-cost quick timing removal spell as well. And if they don't play anything worth you removing, you can just very easily pay 1 to cycle this into any other card in your deck. This essentially means you're a 37-card deck instead of a 40-card deck, since this is just always going to draw you the next card. So, really good for that. It also has slight synergies with Agnes Tachyon, who gives -1/-1 whenever you play a spell. So that kind of turns Insight into a 1 damage removal spell of sorts. In addition to filling our cemetery with spells for our very limited number of spell chain effects that we do play. Next is Lamplit, Training of a Witch to Be. 3 copies of this. It is only slightly better than Angelic Snipe in this deck. Normally there's like no difference between them, but we do have exactly one carrot and a couple different followers that we can race. So this is 1 cost quick timing, deal 2 damage to an enemy follower. If you have a racing follower on your field, deal 3 instead. 90% of the time this is just dealing 2 damage, but for those very fringe scenarios where you are able to race like a Narita Top Road, which is really the only thing you're going to be racing in this deck is the one of Narita Top Road, and you also have a Lamplet training in hand, you are able to get 3 damage in that scenario. Next, we'll play 1 copy of Wind Blast. This also deals 2 damage to an enemy follower for 1. However, it does not have quick timing. The upside is that at spell chain 10, you get to deal 4 damage instead of just 2. Don't be afraid to just run this out early as another 2 damage, 1 cost spell, especially against aggro decks where keeping them off board early is the sort of main strategy you need to employ. It's just more 1-drops for us to draw that we can just keep things off the board with. And if you do draw it late, right, drawing Lamplet Training late, only dealing 2 damage, might not be able to clear a board. Drawing this card late is a little better, where you can actually, you know, clear a 4/4 or something like that for 1 play point. Our first follower we play is a 2-drop. It's Agnes Tachyon from the Uma Musume collaboration booster. This card's pretty staple in any number of Rune builds right now. 2-drop 2/2. Whenever you play a spell, select an enemy follower on the field and give it -1/-1. Not only does this turn our draw spells into like pseudo removal spells, it also just increases the reach on all of our other removal spells. Meaning now things that had 3 defense die to our 2 damage spells, which cost 1. Things that have 4 defense die to our 3 damage removal spells, which cost 2. So we're kind of just getting an extra play point of value out of every spell we play while Agnes Tachyon is on the field. She evolves for 1 into a 3/3, has the same continuous ability, or same triggered ability rather, and also gains, on evolve, you can select a spell in your cemetery and add it to your hand. So in the early game, if you're using things like Fire Chain or Lamplet Training as removal, you can just add those back and keep the removal going. It's especially good against aggressive decks. Later in the game, you can add back things like Eggsplosion, which is going to be our main way of killing our opponent, or Demonic Strike to achieve similar goals, and use Agnes Tachyon more as a threatening presence against your opponent's leader defense. Our next follower is 3 copies of Craig, Wizard of Mysteria. We're playing this card instead of Penguin Soldier in this deck, or Penguin Wizard, not Penguin Soldier. The Penguin Wizard, which only discards spells to draw a card. Craig allows you to draw first, then discard, and he can discard anything, not just spells, which Fanfare is a little more restrictive. We can only do this basically once per copy of Craig, as opposed to Penguin Wizards every turn. But being able to discard followers instead of just spells is huge for this deck. All 5 of our high cost cards are followers, and Humpty Dumpty, which is the main card we want to discard, is also a follower, which obviously if that's the main card we want to discard, Penguin Wizard just isn't doing the job here. We also do play the 3 copies of Trail of Light, which allows us to draw a card whenever it's discarded, which synergizes super well with Craig. It means that Craig, you know, having 6 really good targets to discard is almost always going to be live in some way. And as well, Craig can evolve for 1 into a 3/2, which has the same effect on evolve. So again, you're aiming to discard any of these 6 cards. For 2 play points and an evolve point, or 3 play points, you get draw, discard, draw, discard. Can really help filter into removal spells early, which is still going to help keep your opponent off the board, keep them from threatening you, and help set up our strategy for later in the game. Our 2-cost spell, we have Fire Chain. I've mentioned this a few times already. It's a 2-cost quick timing spell. Select up to 2 enemy followers on the field and deal 3 damage divided between them. This card is huge. So first off, obviously you can just target one thing and deal 3 to it. So for 2 play points, you can trade into X3s, which generally means that you're winning on the play point trade there. Your opponent's spending more than you are to keep the board in a neutral position. However, you can also use it to answer multiple things on the board at once. This is especially good against aggressive decks where, you know, turn 1 they play a 1-drop, turn 2 they play a 2-drop. If you're able to clear both of them at the same time, or even just like 2 1-drops, even though you're not winning in terms of play points, you might even be winning in terms of play points, but even if you're not, even if you're answering 2 1-drops, you're still winning in terms of card economy there. You're going to run your opponent out of followers before they run you out of ways to kill them. So this card is just great overall, especially right now while Heroic Sword is so good. Aggro Abyss is still around a little bit, and a lot of the early Forestcraft followers are reasonably small as well. This is also great with Agnes Tachyon, since you can already split your damage between multiple places. Getting another -1/-1 that can go into either of those places or a third place even, just means that wide boards are never safe against you. You know, your opponent has a X1 and then plays a Floral Fencer, evolves it, makes a 2/2 and a 1/1. You can clear the 2/2, 1/1, and the third X1 just all at once with a Fire Chain and Agnes Tachyon. So really good for controlling the board. Rhymewind is another 2-cost removal spell, this time not damage-based. It is quick timing. Select an unevolved enemy follower on the field and return it to its owner's hand. Spell chain 10, put it on top of its owner's deck instead. So this can only hit unevolved followers, but is just hard removal for 2, no matter, well, soft or hard removal for 2, no matter what its stats are. So you don't have to worry about, you know, your opponent playing a 5-drop 5/5 with Storm or whatever, like a 7-drop 6/6 Gilgamesh, and swinging at you and you only having 2 play points. This still answers it. It's going to put it back in their hand or on top of their deck, so they're going to get to play it again. But you're going to know it's coming the second time, and you can have more than the 2 play points available to answer it. This lets you, for a very low cost, delay your opponent by a turn. It's very good against decks like Uma Musume, where they're not really going to have that many threatening evolved followers in the first place. It's able to answer Daiwa Scarlet, Vodka, Ogre Cap, all of those, just no problem. And against decks like Abyss, where a lot of their actual win conditions that are trying to finish the game are unevolved followers. Dark Alice, Alucard, Dark General. So this is I've got it at 1 in the deck right now. You can add a second copy if you're playing against a lot of these decks. It is sort of one of the flex spots in the deck. I would not recommend cutting it entirely, though, because there are matchups where it is just super good. And since we play 3 copies of Merlin, you're able to search it in those matchups. Next, we play 1 copy of Surefire Bullet. This is another one of those sort of matchup-dependent flex slot removal spells. 2-cost quick timing. Select an enemy follower on the field and deal it 3 damage. If it's an evolved follower, you deal 4 instead. So in a format where we have cards like Amok Knight and Alice, which are evolved 4/4s, this is a great way to remove them. Even if Amok Knight is a 5/5 off of heroic entry, this plus Surefire Bullet plus Agnes Tachyon still answers it. It can also clear, you know, X3 unevolved followers, whether they do or don't evolve, so it still can answer a Flower Princess or anything like that. Just a decent removal spell all around. It is also worth noting again, Agnes Tachyon, you can clear things like Valiant Fencer or Cerberus, which are evolved 5/5s. So pretty good reach on a 2-cost spell. Again, something we just have 1 of right now. You can add a second one if you find it really coming up a lot in your games. Wind Blast, I think, is probably the slot that I would cut for either the second Rhymewind or second Surefire Bullet, if those are just more important removal spells to you. In the early game especially. Next, 3 copies of Trail of Light, obviously. We have discard outs, which means we're going to play Trail of Light. It's just 2-cost draw a card, which you generally don't want to be casting it for unless you absolutely have to. But when it's discarded, you also get to draw a card, which basically makes it a 0-cost draw spell. Using this with Craig means your Craig is now plussing you in hand size. Your Narita Top Road is plussing you in hand size. And we play 3 copies of Heinlein, which can discard a spell to deal 4 damage to an enemy follower, which means our Trail of Light is now essentially just a 0-cost 4 damage removal spell that's not spending us any hand. So really good overall. It can brick a little bit if you draw it without ways to discard it, but we have enough of those that it shouldn't be an issue for you most of the time. Next, we have 3 Humpty Dumpty, which is even more so a follower that we want to be discarding to those same effects. However, in slower matchups, we are still trying to win the game by dealing 20 damage to our opponent. So playing Humpty Dumpty as just a 3-drop 3/3 in slower matchups is not as bad as you would think. especially matchup or like opposing decks that are taking a minute to set up or are just control heavy decks in the first place. You have to be a little careful against Haven because they can banish your Humpty Dumpty, but otherwise, your opponent removing your Humpty Dumpty and sending it to Cemetery is kind of just where you wanted it anyway, so if you force them to spend resources to do that, you're kind of just extending the game into a point where you're favored. Or if they don't answer it, you're attacking their face for 3, or trading into one of their followers even for 3, which means your Humpty Dumpty has now become a removal spell. And any of those are good. There are decent ways to use your Humpty Dumpty and get it in the place you want it. Especially if you got to do 3 damage to their face beforehand. So always keep that in mind when you're using Humpty Dumpty. Otherwise, if you have a way to discard it, that's generally the way you're going to want to go, is just throw it in the grave. We do play 1 copy of the Evolve. Most of the decks using Humpty Dumpty are focusing on the Evolve as a main aspect of their deck. We're not here. In fact, really, we don't need to play the 1 copy, but it will come up every now and then. On Evolve, he deals 5 damage to each follower on the field, including himself, which sends him to Cemetery. Deals 3 damage to each enemy leader, so 3 to your opponent's face, and then you discard your hand. The biggest issue here is the discard your hand part. The other decks that are built around abusing him are doing things like setting up their EX area so that they still have cards to play, or setting up amulets that are able to turn into cards afterwards, to sort of refill resources after they've discarded their hand. In this deck, we very often have quite a large hand, full of spells that we can cast and things we can do. So we don't want to discard it, and we don't have good ways to get it back afterwards. We're kind of just top decking at that point. So really, this card is just only here as 3 damage to enemy face if they're at 3 or less life. If we just absolutely need to kill them by evolving a Humpty Dumpty, we can. But that's kind of the only time this is going to come up. Or, you know, if you're dead on board, if you don't board wipe them and you have to go into top deck mode to survive, doing that is better than just dying, right? Next, we have 3 copies of Merlin, another quintessential staple for Runecraft. 3-drop, 3-2, Fanfare, search your deck for a spell, reveal it, add it to hand. Evolves for 2 into a 4-3. On Evolve, select a spell that costs 3 play points or less in your Cemetery and play it for 0. So obviously on the Fanfare side, we're just searching whatever spell is best for us in the moment. If we don't know what that is, it's generally safe just to search an Eggsplosion, since that is the card we want to be playing as much as possible. The on-evolve effect can do a lot of different things depending on the stage of the game you're in. If you're using this earlier rather than later, copying Fate's Hand to start drawing more cards can be good. If you are at spell chain 10, you'll get a play point back, which means you might still be able to do more things after the evolve, or hold up removal after the evolve. Otherwise, it's just a lot of card advantage. Since you're not playing the card from your hand, you're actually getting 2 cards off of this, as opposed to the +1 hand size you would normally get. If you need removal for like a single follower, Witch Bolt is a great target. It deals 5 to an enemy follower, and since you'll always have an evolved follower, since the Merlin itself is your evolved follower, you'll get to draw a card as well. So that's +1 hand instead of 2, but you're dealing 5 to an enemy follower, so great option there. Otherwise, we just want to target Demonic Strike and Eggsplosion, since those deal damage straight to our opponent's face. They're our quickest ways to kill the opponent. Eggsplosion is generally going to kill your Merlin as well. Keep that in mind, since it deals X damage to all followers, even your own. So if you don't need the board presence, you can just jam Eggsplosions to 5 your opponent's face. If you do want your Merlin to stick around, either to trade into a bigger enemy follower or just stick around in hopes of going 4 to the opponent's face, you can choose Demonic Strike instead, which can do 3 to any target follower or enemy leader. Our last 3-drop follower is Narita Top Road. We're only playing 1. I wouldn't hate trying to find room for a second, but I'm not entirely sure what I'd cut here. This is a 3-drop 3-3. On race, this follower gets +1/+1, draw 2 cards, discard a card. So this is our 1 copy target for our 1 carrot in the Evolved deck. This will be the only thing we race. You shouldn't be using it on Agnes Tachyon. It's just another way to discard Trail of Lights, discard Humpty Dumpties, and keep digging toward removal spells. And becoming a 4/4, especially on turn 3 going second, can be good for just getting extra damage into the opponent's face, or removing followers if we have to. The one of Demonic Strike is pretty common staple in Runecraft builds. just because Merlin is able to search it, which means you can say Merlin, search Demonic Strike, 3 to your opponent's face, evolve the Merlin, recast Demonic Strike from your cemetery to do another 3 to your opponent's face is 6 damage. Really good way to just close out games with burn damage. We don't hate discarding Demonic Strike early, though, since the main use is recasting it from grave. Getting it in there early is just fine. Helps us draw more things that are efficient removal in hand. 3 cost for 3 to a follower at not quick timing is pretty bad in terms of removal spells, so try to keep this in your opponent's face if possible. 3 copies of Eggsplosion. This is the main card of the deck, obviously. This is Eggsplosion Rune. This is the card we want to be playing as much as possible. You deal X damage to each enemy follower, or I'm sorry, each follower on the field and each enemy leader. X is equal to the number of cards named Eggsplosion or Humpty Dumpty in your cemetery plus 1. It does not count itself because it's still in resolution. But if you have, 3 copies of Humpty Dumpty and 1 copy of Eggsplosion, you're dealing 5 damage to all of your opponent's followers and your opponent's leader. If you do that, and then you play a Merlin, and you evolve her, and you Eggsplosion again, that's 5 more damage to your opponent. If you play an Agnes Tachyon, evolve it, add the Eggsplosion back to your hand, play it again, that's 5 more damage. This is how we're winning the game. We're just casting Eggsplosion a bunch, because not only is it dealing damage to our opponent's leader, it is also keeping their followers off the board. Very rarely are you going to run into a matchup that has so many followers with more than 5 defense that your Eggsplosion can't just keep clearing it over and over again. Even if they have something with 6 defense, Agnes Tachyon's effect will still trigger even though the Eggsplosion is killing her, which means you can clear 6 defense followers as well. So, this is just really good at keeping everything off the board. Even decks like Heroic Sword, where they're going 4 followers wide, this can probably just clear all of them at once for 3 play points, which is super efficient. Means that once you reach the point of the game where your cemetery is set up with all these Humpty Dumpties, you've probably won. Unless they just have so much burn and storm damage that your removal can't handle, you've pretty much just won the game. You have inevitability. So this card is just, it's funny. The look on someone's face the first time they see this happen, and it's just Eggsplosion after Eggsplosion after Eggsplosion is wonderful. 1 copy of Fate's Hand. Again, this is our draw spell. It draws 2 cards. I wouldn't hate having a 2nd copy of this. It feels a little rough to hard play when you have better things to be doing, like removing your opponent's followers. But finding the first copy, just to start getting extra cards, especially when you evolve Merlins, feels pretty good. So, I could see an argument for 2 of this. Otherwise, this is just another decent card to discard early. A lot of our 3-cost spells we would rather just discard than play, so that Merlin can start copying them. We have Witch Bolt, our last 3-cost spell. This one we do play 2 copies of, because we actually kind of do want to play the first one from hand. It's 3 cost to deal 5 to enemy follower. If you have an evolved follower, draw a card. 5 is a lot of damage. It's a really good number for 3. It is the same number, obviously, that Humpty Dumpty and Conflagration are doing. So it is just that good number where you're hitting most things. You're hitting Dark Angel Olivia's, evolved Valiant Fencers, evolved Cerberus, like I said earlier. Lots of 5 defense followers that cost a lot more than 3 to get out. So just good removal. Draws you a card back, so it's hand neutral, which is just icing on top. Hand positive if you're getting this off of Merlin. Downside is it's not quick timing, so storm followers are still a little bit of a problem, but overall great removal. And we are playing 2 because we don't mind casting the first one from hand. Especially when we go Craig Evolve on 2 going second, and he lives. This is a perfect turn 3 play. You get to kill whatever big thing they played and draw an extra card. And again, super good off Merlin because it goes hand positive. Our 5-drop follower is Mr. Heinlein, Shadow Mage. This is from set 3. This card is gas. So Fanfare, put the top 4 cards of your deck into your cemetery, recover X play points. X is equal to the number of spells you put into cemetery with this ability. We basically have a 50-50 split between spells and followers, so this is generally going to make him a 3-drop 4/4. That is already pretty decent. 3-drop 4/4. Sometimes you're going to high roll and get a 1-drop 4/4. Sometimes you're going to mill Humpty Dumpties off of this, which feels great, because that just means your Eggsplosions do even more damage. If this guy's like a 3-drop that mills a Humpty Dumpty, and he's a 4/4 that your opponent has to deal with, and they take 4 to the face, that's wonderful. This guy's just hyper efficient. Now, sometimes you're going to mill like 4 followers and feel like an idiot, but, you know, it averages out. Activated ability, you can engage him and discard a spell to deal 4 damage to an enemy follower. This is kind of good because it means even if you mill 4 followers, right, and he is a 5-drop, you can still remove whatever's on your opponent's board, hopefully, by just discarding any spell from your hand to deal 4. It's great with Trail of Light because you're getting to draw a card back, which means it's just basically engage him, deal 4 to something, and get a better card in your hand. He can't discard Humpty Dumpty with the activated ability, but it's fine. He's just good removal. He's generally pretty cheap. He has a reasonable body. He's not huge, but he can still start punching 4 face if you have to. So, really good card to have around. He kind of just lets you turbo into the late stage of the game by milling the rest of the cards that you haven't already searched out. Lastly, we have 2 copies of Mithril Golem. This is kind of the biggest spell chain payoff in the deck, and at 6-drop, it is reasonable that we're hitting our spell chain numbers by the time we play him. Maybe not 15, but 7 at least. Deal 3 to each enemy follower on the field. Spell chain 7, deal 5 instead. If you can get to that point, he is a 6-drop 5/6 that pretty much always clears your opponent's board. That's great, because now they have to answer a 5/6, or they take 5 to the face. If you have 15 spells in Cemetery, he also deals 5 to your opponent's face immediately, which is really good. It makes him a nice way to close out games if you've cast a few Eggsplosions, and you're like near the end of your deck and just haven't quite killed your opponent yet. This is another way to effectively get like 5 storm damage. It's just through an effect, so it's even safer than storm damage. And clear your opponent's board at the same time. 6 defense is also super relevant. Humpty Dumpty can't kill it by blowing up, and Conflagration can't kill it, and Witch Bolt can't kill it, obviously. So most of the removal spells in the game aren't actually going to be able to take out a 5/6. They're going to have to spend multiple sources of removal on him at once, which makes it increasingly likely that you're able to get in for 5 damage with him on the following turn, which accelerates the game even more. So that's the list as a whole. A lot of cool cards in it, a lot of fun stuff going on. Pros of the deck, I think it actually has some really strong upsides, right? You have a lot of cheap removal, so you're keeping the aggro decks at bay. And you have a lot of board wipes between Eggsplosion and Mithril Golem into the late game and mid game. And they do enough damage that they're actually able to board wipe most of the relevant decks that are going wide. So you can keep almost every deck in the format off of their board. And between Eggsplosion, Demonic Strike, and again the Mithril Golem, you actually have a lot of damage straight to your opponent's leader that you don't have to attack to get through, which means it's very hard for your opponent to stop your damage from chipping away at their life throughout the course of the game, while they're also trying to find ways to establish board in the face of all your removal. The cons, unfortunately, we have no defense gain and we have no wards. So you can try to fit Bellringer in here if you really want. Maybe it's worth going over 40 cards to fix some of that stuff. But this deck is just really bad against burn damage. Fable Haven is a bit rough as a result. You kind of just always have to try to keep them off their board and not let them start building anything up, which is hard. Also not great against Dragoncraft. They have a lot of, well, Forte. You can't stop Forte. Is really the biggest thing. That's 7 damage at a time that you have no wards to stop. And if they're playing any of the cheaper dragon followers from like Uma Musume or the armed dragon core that do burn damage straight to face, you don't have ways to stop that either. Next, we are pretty reliant on getting Humpty Dumpty into Cemetery. Now, we do have Mithril Golem, but we do have Demonic Strike, so we have followers that can attack. So we still have ways to win the game without Humpty Dumpty, but we are really wanting to get the Humpty Dumpties straight into our Cemetery so Eggsplosion starts working as fast as possible. Our deck also does contain a reasonable number of bricks. If you draw Trail of Light with no way to discard it, it feels really bad paying 2 just to draw a card. You really don't want that happening. And if you draw Humpty Dumpty with no way to discard it, again, like I said, slow matchups, you can just run him out. But fast matchups where you need removal and you need to be like keeping up with your opponent, playing a 3-cost 3/3 is bad. So we do have some dead draws here. Like early Heinleins even, like being a 5-drop is pretty rough. You really want to get those good hands of like 1 mana removal, 2 mana removal, like card advantage on 3, and go from there. But I think the deck is still reasonable despite these downsides. You have a couple rough matchups, obviously, but I think as a whole, this deck does also have powerful upsides. It just needs to find the right matchups, and it's mega fun to play. So great pro there, right? Some other cards I'd look at. The first one that everyone's going to mention, and this is actually not a card I would play in the deck. I'm going to tell you why not to play this card. Daria Dimensional Witch always sees play in these like spell chain decks. But reminder that this is not actually a spell chain deck. We have enough hand pretty much always in this deck because of our draw engines and Trail of Light that we don't need Daria to get us 5 new cards. Yes, she can discard Humpty Dumpties all at once, but we also don't know that we're going to be able to get anything good afterwards. Especially, you know, if you've been drawing Eggsplosions throughout the game, you'd much rather hard play them than discard them and try to find ways to get them back. So Daria overall is just not great. We actually we were playing 2 and ended up cutting them for the Mithril Golems, and Mithril Golem just feels a lot better as a 6-drop and as a sort of curved hopper. You could play some hard removal that just straight up destroys enemy followers, like Fiery Embrace and Execution. Big thing to remember is that you can't get these back off of Merlin, but you can get them with Agnes Tachyon. So these cards are still decent. Execution can answer amulets, so it's fine against like Leonidas. If they set up Leonidas' resolve, can stop you from dying to that. Can also pop things like March Hare's Tea Time to make the Fable matchups a little easier. Fiery Embrace doesn't hit amulets, but it can deal 3 to your opponent's leader, which gives us a little bit more chip damage to try to end the game as we're removing their followers. So solid option there. Agnes Digital is a follower you consider as another discard out. On race, you can draw a card, discard a card. So now you do have to fit more carrots, obviously, to be able to race it, but it's a 2-1, which is a, you know, decently aggressive stat line for a 1-drop that can start pitching Humpty Dumpties. Kawakami Princess, another Uma Musume follower that can discard any card. So again, you can discard Humpty Dumpties. This one deals 4 to an enemy follower, so it's kind of like a pseudo Heinlein. It's also a 4/4. This is basically a Heinlein that always hits 1 spell on the mill, right? It's a 4-drop. You can discard anything and doesn't have to engage, but you're never going to get, like, it's not going to help you mill extra Humpty Dumpties if they're not in your hand, and you're never going to get the high roll where it's like a 2-drop, and you get to keep doing a lot of stuff afterwards. So, trade-offs, but this is a consideration for sure if you want a little more consistency there, and you'd rather not spin the wheel every time you play a Heinlein. And lastly, we have Tosan Jordan, another Uma Musume follower. This is a 2-drop 2-1 with last words. Select a spell in your cemetery and add it to your hand. So this is another follower that you can play. If they kill it, you get an Eggsplosion back, or some other removal spell back, especially early. Or if they don't remove it, you start punching their face for 2. So, decent way to get extra recursion in the deck. The problem is that all 3 of these are followers, and if you start playing these, you probably have to start cutting your Mithril Golem because you're not getting your spell chain as consistently. You have to start cutting Heinlein, obviously, because you have just way too many followers for his mill effect. And maybe changing around some of the other cards that have spell chain effects to ones that don't, since you're playing a heavier follower-based build. This version might get stronger in BP04 as well, because they do get a 2-cost spell that grabs Runecraft followers off of like top 5, I think. So like maybe this starts getting better there, potentially. But for now, I'd be a little wary if you're adding these just of sort of where the spell to follower ratio is landing. Obviously, it does make your Agnes Tachyons and Merlins worse as well by cutting some of the spells. So here's the deck again. Whole list. You can see the deck log if you want to look at it there at the code in the bottom right. That's going to be 8SUF. That'll be in the description as well. And our evolve deck, pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, as funny as this deck is, you would think it's like a budget rune deck, but because we're playing Agnes and Merlin, it's still just not. But yeah, thank you for watching. This has been a super fun deck to sort of build and play and talk about, so hopefully some other people will try it out and enjoy it at their locals in the last few weeks we have here of the BP03 format. We'll have some more content coming soon now that we're back from Houston, so keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, there should be some videos on the screen that you can check out and watch of some of the other decks I've covered. So again, thank you, and we'll see you next time.